At 9 in the morning, my manager called me our shiny new MBA with that fake smile that hides fear. At 10, HR handed me a termination letter. And by 5 in the afternoon, her voice cracked over the phone. Why is the SEC here right now? That was my day in 3 acts. Dana Leary had always been the kind of manager who mistook sarcasm for leadership. She said it loud enough for the whole floor to hear, standing by the break room door, coffee cup raised like a prop. Welcome back! Our shiny new MBA. Assuming it's even real, she said, the corner of her mouth tightening. I didn't reply. Years in compliance had taught me that silence was safer than applause. Instead, I nodded, walked past her, and opened my inbox 104 unread messages, most of them labeled urgent by people who didn't understand the word. The HR summons arrived at 9:52. Quick check-in. It said, I knew the tone too light, too practiced. Inside the small office, the HR rep avoided eye contact. We're restructuring, effective immediately. No mention of severance, no explanation. I signed where she pointed. Dana didn't even look up when I walked past her office to pack my things. She was laughing with the junior analyst who once asked me if compliance meant following fashion trends. I placed my badge on the desk, closed my laptop, and left quietly. I took the long way home, stopping for coffee even though I couldn't taste it. The city felt gray, heavy with late winter air. I wasn't angry yet, just tired in that deep, bone-level way you feel when you've been underestimated too many times. At 4:45, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I heard her voice. Dana's tight, shaky, stripped of all her morning arrogance. Maris, what did you do? They're here. The SEC actual agents. They're asking for you. I took a breath. Then you should probably check your filings, I said, keeping my tone even. There was a long pause, the sound of muffled voices behind her. Then a click. By 5:15. I was sitting alone, watching the screen of my phone go dark, the day replaying in fragments sarcasm, silence, paperwork, panic. Everything had changed in less than one working day. 3 years earlier, when I first joined Midlake Wealth Management, Dana Leary had greeted me with open arms. Finally, someone who understands the rulebook, she'd said, clapping her hands once like she'd won a prize. Back then, she smiled easily, leaned over my desk to ask questions, even called me her anchor. We worked late together that first winter, 2 women trying to keep a mid-tier firm from capsizing under its own ambition. She trusted me with client disclosures, regulatory audits, even the quarterly reports that scared everyone else. I respected her then. She had presence, confidence, a way of speaking that made people listen. But the shift came quietly. It started the week I mentioned I'd been accepted into Northwestern's part-time MBA program. I remember her face, the pause before the smile, the way she adjusted her blazer as if the fabric suddenly didn't fit right. Oh, she'd said. That's impressive. Then, almost too lightly, guess some of us still need the degree. At first, she tried to be supportive. You'll bring great ideas back, she told me. But soon, every meeting felt colder. My updates became interruptions. My reports turned into suggestions. When I explained a new compliance model I'd learned in class, she cut me off mid-sentence. We don't need textbook fixes. Maris, we need results. I learned to speak less, to document more. I began saving every email, every memo. When clients praised my work, she forwarded it with her name first in the chain. When I stayed late, she said I was overcompensating. The last time we had coffee together, she leaned across the table and said, You know what your problem is? You make the rest of us look like we're standing still. I laughed then, but something in her eyes made me stop. By the end of that year, the warmth was gone. She stopped calling me her anchor. She started calling me our shiny new MBA. And that was the moment ambition stopped being admirable. It started being dangerous to her. It started with the meetings. Small ones, harmless on the surface. I'd prepare a compliance update or a new audit tracker, and Dana would insist on reviewing it first. By the time we stepped into the conference room, my slides were already printed with her name at the bottom. "Let's walk through this new framework I've been developing," she'd say, standing where I should have been standing. The first time it happened, I told myself it didn't matter. Credit was temporary. Records were permanent. After the third time, I began saving everything: drafts, timestamps, even printer logs. Once, after a presentation that earned polite applause, she leaned over and whispered, "You're a great asset, Maris. Just remember who signs your evaluations." Her breath smelled like mint tea and warning. She started holding impromptu chats with my team while I was in MBA night classes. The next morning, I'd find notes on my desk, minor corrections, strange suggestions, little reminders that I was being monitored. When I mentioned it, she smiled sweetly. "Oh, we're all just making sure your workload stays manageable. School must be exhausting." Her tone stayed professional, but the edges cut deeper every week. She began planting small seeds. "Maris is brilliant, but she tends to overthink," or "she's academic, not always practical." Once, I overheard her telling a partner, "Some people think they're too educated to take direction." I stopped sleeping well, started checking my sent folder twice before leaving the office. I began copying legal on emails that didn't need them, just to create witnesses. A few coworkers noticed. One of them, Evan, caught me scanning old filings late one night. "You're building an archive," he said quietly. "I'm building insurance," I answered. He nodded, not surprised. Everyone had seen the shift. One evening, after another meeting where Dana dismissed my comments with a flick of her hand, I sat alone in my cubicle and stared at my reflection in the dark window. I didn't look angry, just alert. The kind of alert that comes when you realize fairness has an expiration date. I started documenting everything because I knew one day I'd need the proof that no one wanted to see. The email came at 9:52. Subject line, "Quick check-in." No punctuation, no context, just the kind of message that pretends to be harmless. I walked into HR at 10 on the dot. The room smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and hesitation. Two people waited. Megan, the HR generalist, and Mark, a junior from legal. I barely knew. Dana wasn't there, which told me everything. Megan's voice was soft, the tone people use before delivering bad news. "Maris, thank you for coming in. We've reviewed your role and determined there's a cultural misalignment." I kept my hands folded on the table. "Meaning what?" "Exactly. It's about fit," she said quickly. "Your technical performance has been excellent, truly." "This isn't about that," Mark added. "We're offering a standard separation package, 2 weeks' pay, and a neutral reference." He couldn't look me in the eye. His fingers trembled when he slid the folder across the table. I read every word. Effective immediately. It said, "No severance beyond 2 weeks. No explanation." I signed at the bottom, then looked up. "You'll need to collect my laptop and revoke my credentials before noon," I said. "You're aware compliance access can't stay active beyond termination." Megan blinked. "Oh yes, of course. It's handling that." I stood. Good. Back at my desk. I opened one last draft I'd written weeks earlier, a template for clean resignation. My letter was concise, dated, signed, and copied to everyone who needed to see it: legal, HR, and the official SEC liaison address listed in our regulatory filings. It was the procedural way to notify the agency that the firm's compliance officer had departed. I clicked send. Then I placed my badge on the desk, powered down the computer, and walked toward the elevator. Donna's office door was closed. Through the frosted glass, I could see her silhouette head tilted, laughing. I didn't stop. By the time the elevator doors shut, the email had already left my outbox. It wasn't a farewell. It was documentation, a signal. I left the building without looking back. Outside, the February wind cut through my coat, but I barely felt it. I walked 2 blocks to the L station and boarded the northbound train toward Evanston. The car was half empty, a few commuters buried in their phones, one teenager asleep against the window. I pulled my laptop from my bag and opened the folder labeled Continuity, a private archive I'd built over the last 3 years. Inside were copies of every policy update, every signed disclosure, every audit note with my initials. Every timestamp proved the same thing: I was the sole registered compliance officer of record. The train lurched, and the lights flickered once. I scrolled through the PDFs, remembering each late night I'd spent fixing Dana's mistakes before they reached the SEC portal. She'd sign whatever I handed her, never reading the attachments. I'd warned her more than once that every filing bore my certification. "We can't play loose with the updates," I'd told her. "If I'm not on the record, the system flags it." She'd laughed. "You worry too much, Maris. No one actually checks." Now they would. I opened the document that mattered most. Form ADV. Part 1. The public record that listed me by name. It required a new submission whenever a firm changed its compliance officer. Without it, the company couldn't legally operate. I had already sent my departure notice, and I knew exactly what that meant. Across from me, an older man glanced up from his newspaper. "Rough day," he asked. "Ending one," I said quietly. He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. The train rolled past the Howard stop. I closed the laptop and slipped it back into my bag. My phone buzzed once, an automated message confirming the delivery of my resignation notice. For the first time all day, I exhaled. I didn't need to shout, or fight, or explain. The records would do that for me. By the time the train reached Evanston, the truth was already moving faster than I ever could. At 5:03, my phone started buzzing on the table beside me. I was in the student lounge at Northwestern, halfway through outlining a case study for business ethics, when the vibration wouldn't stop. Unknown number. I ignored it. It rang again. Then a text flashed across the screen. "They're here. SEC. Asking for you." It was Liam, one of the junior analysts. I called him immediately. He whispered fast, like someone afraid of being overheard. "They walked in 10 minutes ago. 2 agents. Badges out. They asked for you by name." I kept my voice even. "And Dana. She's in the boardroom with them. She looks bad. They're asking about filings from this morning." I could hear muffled voices behind him, someone opening a door, another person swearing. Then the line went dead. Seconds later, Dana called. Her number lit the screen like a warning. I let it ring once before answering. "Maris," she said, breathless. "What did you do?" "I sent my resignation." I said, "You received the copy. You didn't have to involve regulators." She snapped. "They're asking for records compliance logs. Sign-offs, things only you can explain." I let her talk, her voice rising with every sentence. When she paused for breath, I said softly, "Check your filings. Excuse me if you filed anything today. Look at whose name is still listed as Chief Compliance Officer." Silence. I could almost hear the paper shuffle on her desk, the realization sinking in. "Maris, listen," she said, her tone cracking. "We can fix this, just tell them it was a mistake." I already told the truth. I replied, "In writing." She exhaled hard. Then the call cut off. I sat there for a moment, staring at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. Then I opened a new email to my attorney. Subject line: audit confirmed. 3 words, nothing else. When I hit send, I felt the weight in my chest finally ease. I didn't need to defend myself. The records were doing it for me. Across the room, the clock struck 5:15. The city outside hummed on, unaware that somewhere downtown, panic was echoing through glass walls. By the time the SEC team arrived at Midlake Wealth, the office was already spinning. No one knew who had called them, only that 2 agents in Navy suits were waiting in the glass conference room with badges on the table and calm, unhurried expressions. Dana tried to play host. "We're always happy to cooperate," she said, voice brittle. "Just routine?" I assume the lead auditor, a man named Christopher Jensen, didn't answer right away. He slid a printed document across the table. "We're reviewing this morning's Form ADV amendment. Can you confirm who submitted it?" Donna's hand tightened on the pen she was holding. "Our operations team handles filings. Everything should be in order." Christopher nodded once. "Then you won't mind if we check the database." He turned his laptop toward her. The screen showed the firm's profile, time-stamped that morning at 8:46. Under Chief Compliance Officer, one name appeared: Maris Calder. The color drained from Dana's face. "That must be an error," she said quickly. "She's no longer employed here." Then, who authorized the submission under her credentials? Christopher asked. Across the table, Megan from HR tried to speak but couldn't. Papers rustled. Phones buzzed in the hallway. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," outside the door. Christopher leaned back in his chair. "Until this record is corrected, every client disclosure signed today is considered invalid. We'll need full access to your systems and internal communications." Dana stood, voice trembling. "This is absurd. We've done nothing wrong." "Then this inquiry will confirm that," he said evenly. Closing his laptop, "Please ensure no one alters or deletes electronic records. That would constitute obstruction." She sat back down, shoulders shaking. The room fell silent except for the steady hum of the air conditioner. Outside, employees gathered near the reception desk, whispering about badges, about Dana's white face, about the name still glowing on the screen. And somewhere in that building, panic was rewriting every version of the truth they had built together. By the next morning, the story had already spread. The headline blinked across my phone screen while I stirred my coffee. Midlake Wealth under SEC review after filing irregularities. I read it twice. The article quoted anonymous internal sources and described an ongoing federal inquiry into compliance documentation signed under a departed officer's name. That was me. My phone vibrated again, texts from former coworkers. "Dana's losing it." One message read, "Another investor's calling non-stop. Half the clients want meetings." At 10 sharp, I received a voicemail from someone on the board, Victor Harlan, the senior partner who once told me I was too procedural for my own good. His voice cracked with rehearsed calm. "Maris, if you have a moment, Dana's requested your assistance clarifying some filings. We'd like to discuss a short-term consultancy arrangement." I didn't call back. By noon, another alert appeared. Leary suspended pending investigation. I pictured her office, the blinds drawn, the laughter gone. I opened my laptop and pulled up my MBA capstone draft. The title stared back, Institutional Negligence and the Cost of Ego. It had begun as an abstract paper about leadership blind spots, but now it felt like a confession written in advance. I scrolled to the case study section, hesitated, and began typing Case Study 3, Midlake Wealth Management, failure to recognize compliance as an ethical function, not a bureaucratic one. Leadership's prioritization of optics over accountability created systemic exposure. The resulting inquiry demonstrates the fragility of culture built on denial. I paused, reread the paragraph, then added one final line. Negligence is rarely accidental. It's comfort misnamed as confidence. Outside, the sky had turned heavy, a dull gray that matched the tone of every headline. I closed the laptop and leaned back, letting the quiet fill the space. Another text came in from Liam, the analyst. "They're blaming each other now. Whole floor's chaos." I typed back 2 words, "Stay calm." Then I put the phone face down and returned to my paper. There was still work to finish. The lesson was writing itself. The email arrived just after sunrise. The subject line read, "Proposal for Strategic Re-engagement." It came from Harold Benton, the firm's outside counsel, a man whose voice always sounded like an apology wrapped in fine print. He called a few minutes later. "Maris," he began, polite but strained. I know this might sound unexpected, but the board would like to bring you back temporarily. Strictly advisory. 3 months. Generous compensation. Full discretion. I let him talk. They believe your expertise could help stabilize the situation, he continued. You'd be working remotely. Of course. It's less about blame, more about continuity. Continuity, I repeated. That's an interesting word for a company that erased me overnight. Things moved too fast, he said carefully. Dana overstepped. The board regrets how it was handled. Do they regret filing under my name? He paused. We're addressing that. By offering hush money. It's not hush money, he said quickly. It's recognition. $200,000 for 3 months of consultation. You'd have control over messaging to regulators. Access to prior files. Stop, I said. You're asking me to clean the mess they made after firing me for doing my job. I'm asking you to consider what's best for everyone. I almost laughed. Everyone but me. You mean, he sighed. If you decline, they'll find someone else, and it won't be handled as delicately. I opened my laptop while he spoke, scrolling to the folder marked Evidence. Every email, every warning, every signature they'd ignored waited there. Harold, I said, I'll save you the trouble. I'm not interested in remediation. My attorney will follow up with documentation under whistleblower protection. The silence on the other end lasted long enough to sound like respect. Understood, he said finally. Good, I replied, and ended the call. I forwarded the entire thread to my lawyer with a single note. Decline formally. File protections today. Then I closed the computer and sat still, the morning light creeping across the floor. Freedom, I thought, had finally stopped costing me silence. 6 months later, I stood at the front of a small lecture room at Northwestern, facing 30 students who looked the way I once did, ambitious, exhausted, half convinced they could fix the world with a spreadsheet. The professor, Dr. Bennett, introduced me as a guest speaker on ethics and organizational resilience. I smiled, though the title felt heavier than it sounded. When it was my turn, I set my notes down and said, I used to believe compliance was about control, rules, checklists, approvals. It isn't. It's about courage, the kind that doesn't announce itself. The room quieted. 1 year ago, I continued, I worked at a firm that treated compliance like decoration. They thought laws were flexible. That oversight was optional. Until the day the people who wrote the rules showed up at their door, a few students exchanged looks. One raised her hand. Were you the whistleblower? I was the record keeper? I said. The truth didn't need my voice. It just needed to be documented. A young man in the back frowned. But didn't that destroy your career? I nodded. It ended one version of it. Then it built another. The SEC called what happened a structural failure. I called it a case study. Dr. Bennett smiled faintly from the corner. And what did you learn from it? That integrity isn't a performance metric. I said, it's gravity. You can defy it for a while, but eventually it pulls everything back to balance. Someone laughed softly. Someone else wrote it down. I closed my folder and looked around the room, faces lit by laptop screens, notebooks filling with words they might one day forget. Before leaving, I added one last thought. Never be the only one holding the roof up. When they pull the support, step aside and let gravity teach the lesson. When the class ended, a few students lingered to thank me. One said quietly, I hope I'd have done what you did. I smiled. You won't know until it's your turn. Outside, the campus bell rang, clear and even, as the truth kept echoing on its own.